Also, schönen guten Abend, herzlich willkommen zu unserer Vorlesungsreihe. Wir freuen uns ausgesprochen, dass ihr so zahlreich erschienen seid. Wir haben heute auch einen doch ganz schön wichtigen Gast, 'ne bedeutende Architektin, die ich kurz einführen möchte. Bevor ich das tue, vielleicht ganz kurz zur Vorlesungsreihe, auch für dich, Ellen. Also, die Reihe ist dienstags um 6. Und, in dieser Reihe haben verschiedene Lehrstühle ihre Beiträge geleistet. Wir machen den Beitrag Beauty im Rahmen unseres, Architecture in the Age of Neoliberalism. Wir hatten Angelo Lunati, wir hatten Jan Meyer und wir haben heute Ellen van Loon, früher bei OMA, bis vor ganz Kurzem bei OMA Partnerin gewesen. Wir haben nächste Woche in der Dienstag um 6 Reihe, Gustav Düsing. Ähm, Das wissen wir noch nicht hundertprozentig, ob das stattfindet. Das müssen wir noch mal ganz kurz abklären. Und wir haben, am 3.6. Professor Dr. Daniel Cardoso-Letsch. Wir haben Maximilian Luwak am 17.6. und wir haben am 24.6. den Vortrag von Professor Eike Schling, Neuberufung, relativ Neuberufung hier bei uns. Das ist sein Einstieg, sein Einführungsvortrag. Also soweit noch mal kurze Werbung für die Reihe, aber jetzt zu Ellen van Loon, Architektin aus den Niederlanden, und hat 'ne bewegte Geschichte hinter sich. Sie hat in den 1990er Jahren bei, Forster und Partners gearbeitet, ist dann, in den späten 90ern, nämlich 1998, nach Rotterdam, ja, in die Niederlande quasi zurückgekommen, hat, bei, OMA, bei Rem Koolhaas, angefangen und ist, bereits 4 Jahre später, 2002, Partner geworden. Also, sie hat offensichtlich 'n starkes Profil, 'ne starke Persönlichkeit, und ist bis zum letzten Jahr, bis 2024, Partner gewesen. Also, sie hat 22 Jahre maßgeblich, das Büro mitbestimmt, hat, 'ne ganze Reihe von, prestigiösen, Projekten, geleitet, entworfen, in ganz unterschiedlichen, Sparten, also kulturell, öffentlich, privat, für die Modeindustrie und für, Schulen, Education, Universitäten. Also, sie hat eigentlich 'nen riesen Spektrum an Architektur, ja, bearbeitet in ihrem beruflichen Leben. Also, Projekte wie zum Beispiel die, Aviva Studios in Manchester, die meines Erachtens auf dem Gebiet der alten Factory stehen, ne? Das ist ja das
Ja,
Ersatzprojekt für die Factory gewesen.
ich werde das später erklären.
Bitte? Du wirst es später erklären, okay,
Ja,
ja,
ich
ja.
werde es später erklären.
Die Qatar National Library in Doha, Fondation, Lafayette in Paris, Galerie Lafayette, das BLOX Building in Kopenhagen, der Rotterdam in Rotterdam, eines der markantesten OMA-Gebäude in Rotterdam, CCTV Headquarters in Beijing, die, niederländische Botschaft in Berlin, deswegen spricht sie auch wahnsinnig gut Deutsch. Sie hat über 5 Jahre in Deutschland gewohnt, wenn ich mich recht erinnere. Sie weiß aber noch nicht, ob sie heute Abend Deutsch spricht. Das überlegt sie sich, wenn sie hier oben ist, hat sie gesagt. Casa da Música in Porto, Brighton College, Centrale Supélec in Saclay in Paris, großer Universitätsumbau. Das sind vielleicht so die wichtigsten, also es sind so viele Projekte, glaube ich, das führt zu lange, das dauert zu lange, um das jetzt alles ausführlich zu erwähnen. Also, den Mies van der Rohe Award, gewonnen, den RIBA Award, hat sie gewonnen mit ihren Arbeiten. Sie hat, weltweit Vorträge gehalten. Sie hat, glaube ich, nicht gelehrt an der Uni. Sie hat, alle ihre Energie in die Arbeit im Büro gesteckt. Genau, also ihre Arbeit kennzeichnet sich durch, würde ich sagen, ja, so scharfsinnige Definition von einer programmatischen Komplexität, die dann in, ja, räumliche Narrative übersetzt wird, die sehr charaktervoll sind. Einfache konzeptuelle Ideen, die sozusagen in räumliche Konfiguration ja, übersetzt werden und damit den Gebäuden ja sowas geben wie einen starken Halt. Sie hat auch für AMO gearbeitet, also den intellektuellen Think Tank von OMA. Und insgesamt 26 Jahre in dem Büro gearbeitet, ist sie in 2024 ausgetreten, um mehr Zeit für ihr privates Leben zu haben oder neue Abenteuer, von denen sie uns vielleicht was erzählen wird. Also, ganz herzliches Willkommen für Ellen van Loon.
Ich bin meine Brille vergessen, so wenn ich meine Sonnenbrille aufsetze, ist das nicht, um irgendwie gesehen zu werden, aber um euch zu sehen. Ja, beauty. It's not an easy theme to receive. But anyway, I don't know how that is in your case, but when I studied, the word beauty was actually never used. So everybody thought about it, but nobody was daring to say anything about it or use it as any measure for judgment. So, and I think that is a bit the issue with us architects. We hardly talk about it. So I will try to talk about it, and I already investigated before I started, just a half an hour before, what the idea behind this theme was, because I was wondering, is it the idea that I should say, whatever I did in this project, that I thought it was ugly at the end or not? So anyway, so we will see. I will give my view on beauty. But most importantly, it's not so easy to come to beauty in architecture, if it is at all beauty, but that I leave to you as a judge. Okay, let's start. This is a definition of Corbusier, and I think this is a quite striking explanation. He was, of course, Swiss, and everybody thought he was French. But the thing is, you employ stone, wood, and concrete, and build it, and put these materials, you build houses and palaces. That is construction, ingenuity at work. But suddenly, you touch my heart. You do me good, I'm happy, and I say, this is beautiful. That is architect. Art enters in. So I think what is important about what is written here is that I think when we talk about beauty, we talk about emotion. And I think it's very difficult to grasp and to describe what that emotion is. And I think this is what it is for me. When you look a little bit further, in the last 10 years, suddenly beauty becomes a theme in architectural education. And all kinds of people try to give a definition on it. You know, it's about harmony and function, but we all know that. But at the end, it never touches the core of what beauty is. And that, I think, is the innovation. Because what it says here, it says a lot, but it doesn't talk about emotion. Anyway, I'll skip that. So what is beauty? And who decides what beauty is? And that is actually what I want to talk about today. Because our process of designing, I mean, when you're at university, you design one thing, but you're actually hardly interrupted by a client, a contractor, all kinds of forces around your design process that actually at the end have a big influence in where you end in your design of your project. And a design process is very multiple. I think if you look at your own design process, when I look at my design process, it's actually these two things. Normally, a building is conceptualized in a group. At least that is how I worked over all the years I worked. And in this group, you have many people with many ideas. So it becomes actually more a matter of collecting ideas and then tuning these ideas down. And you go in circles and circles and circles and circles until at a certain point you make a decision and you say, okay, on this issue, we do this. So as you can see, this is not like a process, it's a long process. And then after you did that in a competition, for example, you know, you have 8 weeks of considering all kinds of things with your team, etc., etc. And then you win the competition, and then you're faced with all of this. Budgets, always a big issue. Client satisfaction, when you're unlucky, you have a client that doesn't even fit your design, and you are in disagreement all the time. The culture, and of course, social media. This all has an influence on your design. And if you look at the design process, at a certain point in your process, everybody thinks he's an architect. Seriously. So you start small. So let's say this is the architect, this is the client. But then the client is hiring all kinds of external project managers and God knows what. So the group becomes a lot. And they all have an opinion. And then you go into construction, and even the bricklayer has an opinion about what you're doing. So this basically means that your whole design process, starting from here to there, is sometimes more management than design. Because the only thing you need to do as an architect, control these people so that end result that you want to have in your mind is actually going to be executed. And that is quite difficult. And sometimes it's also good because there might also be a person who suddenly comes up with a very good idea, which you can take on board and go further. But the most difficult thing is to control the outcome. I'm going to show 3 projects I did, some older ones and some newer ones, to just explain to you, tell you a little bit about the design process. Well, I suppose you know this project. This is Casa da Música in Porto. This project was a competition, and we won the competition in 1999, and it was finished in 2005. This project was, as I said, a competition with shape, which at that point nobody believed you could ever build it. But it started already off in a very difficult way with this. Budget was 25 million, and we all knew that the building would cost 50 million. So the amount of discussions we had with the client about money was insane. And then this client was also the user of the building. So whatever proposal we made, cost savings, they said, no, we want to keep that, we want to keep that, we want to keep that. So at the end of the day, we didn't save any costs, we either ended up a bit higher, but a cheap building. Our client was a pianist, Pedro Burmeister, and he stopped the activity, being a musician at that time, and wanted to dedicate all his energy to this building, not in designing the building, but also programming the building. And he really wanted to make it a building that is all about music and as many types of music as you can like for everybody in Porto. Porto is a city. I show you 2 pictures that represent for me Porto. On the left side, these buildings, and on the right side, in the center, we had a large auditorium. And then perpendicular to that, with few windows to the auditorium, we had all the other different rooms for music. And this was the model of the competition. And here we try to explain to the client that this was the idea. This brought us a little bit in a difficult situation because at a certain point, the client thought that we envisioned this building completely in glass, which was not the case. Functionality. So here you see the building, and here you see all the different rooms that are actually cut out of a solid volume. With here some images, the entrance. And the idea is this is a section, it's a very funny project because in the office, nobody knew what the section and the plan was. So the section and the plan, they look very similar. So when you had the project on your table and people came around, they're like, is this a section or a plan? So I consider that a compliment that basically meant that the whole 3D sculpture was as well in plan as the section visible. But this was the idea. You have the 2 auditoria, and around the 2 auditoria, you have all kinds of programmatically rooms that you can program in a different way. And this you see in plans, so these are all the different plans of the project with the large and the small auditorium, with all kinds of areas around. And then all these areas would then be connected with a loop that basically takes you from the entrance all the way around, where you pass all the rooms and then you can come out of the building. This is the model, and in this time, there was no 3D. Well, not really. We had one computer guy who made us the shell, and then we cut it on 1 meter above floor level. So we knew outside of the building was. That was about all it. But as you can see, these kind of spaces are routings and rooms, and they're all in different shapes that we all had to calculate or figure out in model how that would work, and later on translate that into construction. And then construction, the concrete was a big task. And of course, we came up with this kind of total crazy idea. We were so obsessed with geometry that we unfolded the whole building like this. And we put one grid over it and then folded back together. And that was the pattern of the concrete. But then the contractor came on board, and this was, of course, a nightmare for the contractor because he pours horizontally and not in angles. So we had endless long discussions, but I thought at any point that the client would tell us, "You're totally crazy, we're not going to do it. We're just going to make the pattern horizontally, and that's the end of the line." But they didn't. They executed it like that. And here you see some of these pictures are crazy as well. All these kind of sloped planes were reinforcement, and this is then the final result. So you see the horizontal line is the line of the pores, and the other is the lines of the formwork. And here you see some images of how it was in concrete. By the time we finished the concrete sculpture, the client was very enthusiastic. So there were no windows in the building, and they wanted already to do a concert. So they did the concert in the main hall, and then after the concert, they said, "The acoustic is wonderful." And I was like, "There are no windows, there's no walls." But anyway, they got really, really into it. And this was actually a picture of this concert in construction, which, as you can see, a very nice view. And also the car park was used extensively during construction for all kinds of house parties and techno parties, as you can see here. So the good thing was we had already a very doing construction, and that helped us also. Finishes. This is the moment where you really get into discussions with your client, because everybody's an interior architect. So we came up with this scheme. So every room, the idea was that the building is white concrete, but every room, special room with special function, had a different finish. So it's actually like a scripted route, going from room to room to room, and try to also put you completely every time in different atmosphere. I'm not going to show you all the rooms, which is not that. This was the main auditorium, and as I told you, we had, of course, money issues from day one. So we had to find a material that was cheap, but cheap at the same time. So we came up with this idea of just using plywood and apply gold leaf onto it in a certain pattern. It's a kind of enlarged pattern of the plywood below. And we were lucky, we found some really nice restoration ladies in Porto who restored old churches and did all the gold leaf. They made eventually all the panels. And that made it also affordable and doable. You see the effect. So it's quite a nice effect. And is the menu of the ingredients that we all designed except for you. So we started with the coordinated ones. We wanted these windows, but our for acoustics. So it cannot be flat. So that's why we came up with the idea to corrugate the glass like this. And then, of course, because it's corrugated, it's quite strong, so you could actually have 5 meters in one go. And it was actually quite an interesting way of looking at glass. And so here you see the inside of the wall with gold patterned walls, and at the end you see the corrugated glass. And what was very nice, which I think was also And now I'm going to a bit in the terms of beauty. What I think was very nice about this hall, it gives you not a clear view in the auditorium, but it gives you a hint. And it's kind of, these are for me poetic moments. You can see a bit in, but not quite. And then you see the library of all the spaces and the areas behind. This is where I get enthusiastic. The canopy, as you can see, it was a big pillow. We had, of course, to make a big pillow above the stage for the reflection of the sound. And then at the end, we designed this hall with 2 organs because that's what the client wanted. But it turned out that organs were really, really expensive. At a certain point during construction, they said we can't afford organs. So we run a bit into trouble because organs were actually quite important for the acoustics also. And we also considered ourselves not the best organ designers. So what we did, we just stole through 2 designs of existing organs. This one is from Bilbao. This one we found somewhere in Mexico. And this was just made for us. So they're both fake, as you can see. And then, of course, the seats and the curtains were designed. I mean, it's incredible how much design work was put in this building, especially when I look back at it now. But also the curtain you see, also here was this idea of putting this kind of veil. So you see it, but not quite true. So it's all about illusion. And I think that is the nice part about this building. The seats we also designed, as you can see here, it took us a lot of time. And here you see we made a little light in the armings of the seats, as you can see here, so you can read your program. But that, of course, had also a marvelous effect when you look back from the stage to the auditorium. Sorry about not handling this very well. You see this kind of, let's say, cloud of little lights, which is also, I think, quite poetic. And then, of course, the VIP room, we took the most traditional blue tiles that everybody knows here from Portugal. A certain pattern of the wall. This was a test. And here you see it in the room. A final result. I go quickly through this. So this is how the building eventually looked. It's a big square. This is how it appears in the city center. Here from the square. Here from the monastery, from the cemetery. This is how you enter. And I just take you. And when you enter, this is quite a concrete space. So this is the space where you feel the concrete the most. But in these spaces, we also wanted to show the back of house to the public. So we put, we put all kinds of filters also in between the rooms of the and public spaces behind, as you can see here. And we did that in so many places. We opened the building. The client called us and said, we need curtains everywhere because the musicians go crazy. They don't want to be seen, etc. And I thought, I'm not going to react just for half a year, and I didn't. And after that, I didn't hear anything about it anymore. So I think that is quite nice in this building, that the back of house and the front of house is connected. This is the foyer, the main foyer leading up to this is when it's in use. This is when it's clubbing night, when they use every centimeter of this building for different acts. It goes on till 6 o'clock in the morning. But also the foyer, every square centimeter of this building can be used for performance. This is the foyer of the large auditorium. Here you look into the auditorium. And here you look from the outside into the auditorium. This is one of the spaces around it where you look back. This is on the roof, which can be opened in the external terrace. And then here, this is just for fun, to show that the building is also used as a background for fashion photography. And also for broadcasting. So this is one of the terraces on the top of the roof. And we also, the building is located on quite big squares. We had also designed a square. But in the square, we had to include some rooms, a bus stop and a store. So we decided to basically sculpt the edges up in curves as a kind of design solution, but we never really realized how well this was used. So now the whole square is day and night used by skaters, as you can see here, and performances. So that is actually quite nice. And the building itself is also used, as you can see here. Here I got a bit of a heart attack in the beginning because I thought, why the hell are you drilling holes in this beautiful concrete? But as you can see, it's worth it at the end of the day. So here you see how they hang it, and this is when there's a full festival around Casa da Música. Now I want to. Sorry, Jesus. Okay. This was a very strange project because it was a public project financed by mostly European money, but also money from the government in Lisbon. But at that time, when we were designing the project, every year there was a new election. And as it goes in South of Europe, when there's a new election, the director of this institute has to be of the same political color as the party in charge in Lisbon. So I made them red and blue. You can imagine what it is. We started socialist, we ended right wing, but we had every year a different director. And you could say that would be a nightmare for a design process, but actually it was the best for us because we never discussed the design with the client ever. We just did it, you know. So we were not interfered. We just did it till the end because they never had time. Every time a new guy came in, he got a big pool of shit around money and all kinds of other things he had to solve. So he had no time to look at design and other things. So, and that was good for us. And then, of course, as I said, you know, people were quite negative about the building. The press was negative because it was constantly over budget. The people, architects in Porto were very negative because it didn't look like CISA building, blah, 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 blah. So just a few weeks before the opening, Nikolai Urisev came to Porto and visited the building, and he wrote a very good article about the New York Times. And that changed everything. So suddenly, nobody complained about anything anymore. Not about the money, not about the. And so suddenly, everybody was happy. And then, of course, you also wonder, was the initiative of this project also? And this is what he said, Pedro. The challenge here is to see everything that works inside as being connected to something else, like the building is. You are in one place, in another place. It should be same thought as you organize the programming of the building. You have to use the whole building as an instrument. And this is actually also how we thought about the building. And I think that it's very nice that these two ideas came together, but also grew together. It's not something on day one, you know everything that you are going to do in the next years, because that is how a project takes. But you grow together and you somehow build this together and make it to work. Now, this and the cost you may be interested in, 25 to 70. But considering that the building is 26,000 square meters, I think this was a bargain. And who decided what beauty was? Now, as I just said, we were very lucky. All the directors were there only for 1 year, so we decided at the end. So this was a very lucky project for us. Not easy to build. We had to do a lot of stuff to get it done, but we could decide ourselves. The Rothschild Bank in London, yeah, you can imagine. From a cultural project in Portugal to bankers. Do you see they all look the same? This is actually quite different because some have a pink tie. Normally they all have the same tie. But anyway, bankers, yes. Um, we had to get used to that. And it was not just bankers, it was the Rothschilds. And Rothschilds, as you know, is an old German family from Frankfurt with 5 brothers. And the father sent his 5 brothers to different places in Europe to start a business. And that is where the Rothschild started. And the people, let's say, the people we're dealing with was actually the French part of the Rothschild family. Anyway, architecture, these guys were really graphs. You know, this kind of 2D stuff, they were really good at it. But 3D was a nightmare. And I will show you, they had no idea. Whatever drawing, movie, or whatever things you made for models, they did not understand until it was there, one. Now, this was our client, David, and Eric, and the two investment bankers. And we had, I couldn't find a picture of it. We had a project manager who loved to do this. He called himself always, I'm the humble man. So with him, we spent most of the time. But these boys at the end decided. And quite often when we had a meeting, there was a design decision to make. They said, shall we democratic? Oh, now I just decide. So that was a bit, but this is what we faced. Imagine, this was their home. Wall paneling, portraits, British couches, the dining room, look at that, with all the portraits of the different Rothschilds. And yeah, so I was a bit like, okay, let's try this out. What are we gonna do? Anyway, this was the concept. We imagined a kind of palazzo on the side, auxiliary spaces in the middle of the most historical area in London, where the banking area. Here you see we were surrounded by a very important monuments, which I consider very important in this area. And of course, the task was to earn money. These were bankers. These guys, they grew from a small organization to a very large organization. They were housed in different buildings. And they basically asked us, make the building as big as you can and make sure we all fit it. That was the task. Now, as you can imagine, the lower line here is the bottom line, and we are up there. So there was quite some discussion with the city to get it up there and create this volume in there. And that process was very, very intense. We had a meeting with the city architects. And I remember the first meeting we had, we went with the project manager and with Rothschild. And that meeting went totally wrong. The city architect got really annoyed and they were like, okay, go back. I don't want to see this anymore. This is enough. So the next day we talked to the client and we said, maybe it's better you don't go with us, we go alone. That is better for the atmosphere. And they were okay with that, but it was a long process, really a very long process in getting to a design solution that the city architects could approve, because the location was so sensitive. So at the end, it became a queue with annex, as you can see here. That was actually at the end the building. As you can see, so here you see, so we broke it down. We had a quite efficient queue because they needed lots of office space, but here you see the annexes and the little mansion with a historical St. Ren church in the back. But this building is not very visible, as you can see, because the distance to the neighboring buildings is around 3 meters. So there's all very narrow alleys. So you see it in bits, but it doesn't really, you never see it in full, as you can see when you walk around. And this gives you some idea how close we are. This was the widest meters. So when you sit here, you can basically see the computer of the guy. And here you see how this is building a Foster, which is, I think is ugly when we talk beauty here. But also here we got quite close, so it was quite difficult. What we did behind the church, behind the building, there was a very beautiful church. It's the St. Ren Church, the first church of St. Ren, and very important. So in order to see that from this narrow alley here, actually the central building up. So to create a kind of transparency to the back. And here you see that. So here you see then that the whole ground floor is opened. There's the little graveyard here of the church and the church behind. And the idea was then actually to do this. So this is all open. So this narrow alley of 3.5 is actually winded completely up and was reconnected again to the stair. With on the left side the church, and with on the left side the lobby, and on the right side the archive, which I will show later. And this is what you can see. So this is the building. And it was very important for the city architect to find the street edge, of course. So that's why we took these columns down. But it also created a beautiful screen between the public space and the more private area. Yeah, then the finishes. So they had an enormous archive from the Japanese emperor 200 years ago. These kind of things. You could say it was also enormous what we found. They had old books, they had an old archive from Russia, etc., etc. And this history, we had to combine this building in some way. So we actually wanted to go from this to something a bit more modern, which was really the hardest part of the whole design process in this building. So what we tried to do, we took actually some art paintings of, this is Nathan Rothschild, was the brother who was sent to, the son that was sent to London. We actually manipulated all these known historical pictures into materials and applied that in the building. That was the idea. And here you see, and then on top of that, of course, we had also a lot of other things, paintings, gifts, gobelins, all kinds of things, which were actually mostly housed into the archive, but was never seen by anybody else. So, in order to get this commission for the interiors, because in the UK, it is quite normal that as an architect, you get the commission to do the building, and then they call an interior architect to do the interiors. This is very normal. So that was also about to happen to us. So what I did, we made a proposal for the interiors free of any fee in order to get this commission, because we were like, this is going to be terrible when somebody else is finishing the material. And this is actually one of the schemes we made. This here you see the section of the building. So on the ground floor, that was very important for us, of course. This is the first where you see the building, the entrance, the archive. There is the central block. It's just straightforward offices, very densely populated, and it goes in London. And then we have a special space on the 10th floor where the management is, where the meeting is, where all the big money deals are made. A garden and a club building, also called the mansion. So this is how the section of the building should be explained. And this is a kind of image we made for them, because they're going to hire interior architects. That was good. But of course, this space and all the special spaces, of course, we want and not leave it to this interior architect. So that's why we made a proposal for this area and for the mansion. And we thought we're going to sprinkle a little bit of heritage in the design of the other interior architect. But anyway, that collaboration was really nice. So to the point that I never entered those levels because it's just terrible. Here's some pictures of how it looks. So here we are, just behind this car on the street. So you see the lobby is slightly lifted above the street level, which gives really some privacy on the public street. And that looks really, really well. On the left side, the lobby, and on the right side, you have the archive. And as you can see here through, here's the church. Of course, the transparency was a problem for the watchers, because in the old building, you could not see anything. They had glass, but there were everywhere curtains, and you were actually not able to see anything. Everything was a bit secretly what's happening behind the doors. So we came up with this kind of big glass lobby, so they were a bit like, really? Do we really have to be seen? That's why this curtain was designed, not as a kind of solid view barrier, but more as as we did in Casa da Música, a kind of screen where you can still see some shades, but not quite clear what is happening there. With on the other side, the archive. And here we printed the heads of the 5 brothers on the glass. And then inside, we really went very traditional. Of course, we had to hang these paintings somewhere. So this was our design. We envisioned actually quite a historical library with a lot of books on top, and with these paintings combined on the table. Now, how does this look? This is how it looks at the moment. Of course, we did a few tweaks. The shelves, as you can see, are very thick, and it has a bit of a modern. We have movable panels in front where the paintings are hanging, and here you see a center table. But as you can see, this is almost, it's very, very classic, and actually that works very, very well in this kind of cold building. The 10th floor, this was really the floor of the highest management, and here we had this idea of making a corridor with like police. And we translated this into this. So there is a kind of corridor where everybody is arriving, the elevators, and we envisioned walls perpendicular with different design where we reinterpreted the historical material that we found in the archive. And what we also did, these kind of the wood panels that I showed you before. So we recollaged the wood panels and translated that in a kind of engraved metal paneling. We found a company in Holland, was owned by a guy of 90 years old, and he was so enthusiastic because he started this company as an engraver, and he made these panels, as you can see here. So it was basically translated into that. Also, one room we reused some of the old panels. But then, of course, since our bankers were only used to 2D and graphics, we had to build this one-to-one in the space, as you can see. So everything was mock-up with every, so here you see some blueprints. So we did many different walls in this level, but it all had to be charged one-to-one. And this is the final result of the space. And then the mansion, that is this room on top. We always envisioned a kind of top because in London it's so tight, you cannot see anything. And this was really done in a period in London where the rooftops were really used for air handling units. So there was no occupational roofs or made use with any nice function on the roof. So this was our competition design. And this is how we sold it. Just pretend there is a dinner with the Queen. And that worked. So since then, we were able to make the room. Now, we did an old thing, I skipped that for the moment. And then, of course, there was the roof terrace, because also they had never any exterior space. And this was, of course, a beautiful space. So, and of course, also here, we dwelt a bit on the mansions that they owned, etc. This is one of the images of the mansion they own, with all kinds of, very British kind of historical pattern, bushes, very sharp grass, how the Brits are. And of course this. And then, of course, during the whole design, the most discussion was about meeting rooms. We don't have enough meeting rooms. So at a certain point, I thought, why don't we make meeting rooms on the roof? So we actually made these are all meeting rooms. So you can book the meeting room on the roof and then have lunch there. That was the whole idea. And here you see how it actually looked just after opening. What is not so nice about this is apparently David had vertigo issues. So we had nice handrails, you have a beautiful view of the city, but actually that scared the hell out of him. So they planted bushes all over so far the panorama. Anyway, recently they are removed again, so you can see a bit more, but that is how things sometimes can totally go wrong in your design. So who decided what beauty is? Yeah, that's a difficult one. I can tell you, it was really one of the most complicated projects I ever did, because we wanted to be modern, they wanted to be conservative. Actually, it takes so much effort. You know, we had to make samples, we had to make 10 proposals for everything. In order, we needed actually 2 years together that they could get used to us and we get used to them. And at the end of the day, I think we got to a kind of sign language that we both like. And this is how our profession sometimes is. It's not so easy. You can have the most beautiful idea, but if your client doesn't want it, it's the end of the line because he pays. And you don't. He pays you. And I also had a client that once told me, you have to listen to me now. You are a consultant, you are a service provider, so you do what I say. And that's very difficult in our profession because it's not that simple, you know. Anyway, so on this project, I think we decided both at the end, and we had to push very hard from our side to come to a translation that we also liked. That is actually what the process was in this project. And then the last project I'm going to show you is the factory. I still call it the factory. Unfortunately, you know how this goes. They had a sponsor, and now it's called Aviva Studios. It's terrible, because for me it's a factory. But anyway, this is a performance building in Manchester, well, which was also a competition that we won. And Manchester is a bit like this. It's quite a rough city. It's of course a former industrial city where infrastructure was the most important thing in the city. But a lot of this infrastructure looks quite rough. Some viaducts also fall down, and it's a very hard city where beauty is difficult to define unless I think this is beautiful. But anyway, not everybody does. So for me, this is beauty. But for most people will say, what the hell are you doing in Manchester? It's the most horrible city in the UK. And here, some more infrastructure. And don't think they put the infrastructure not with some kind of view how to make a beautiful city. No, just put it there where it was needed. And that was it. Anyway, the start, there is a long history behind this organization. And it started with Factory Records. I don't know if any of you know, but this is Tony Wilson, Peter Saville, and Alan, I always forget his name. They started a label a long time ago in Manchester. And I love this picture because you see all the banners. This is Manchester. This is how Manchester looks. And their label was quite special at that time because they were, for example, they had Joy Division, all these kind of bands when I was young, when I was 18. The music I listened to, they put on vinyl, where not many labels wanted to put them on vinyl. They had beautiful graphic design, but mostly by Peter Saville at the time. It ended up with the Hacienda Club. I don't know if you know. This was the end of this factory idea, but this club, I think, existed only a few years, and it died from drugs and all kinds of other not accepted things. But you can see a little bit of the language of this history. This was our client. It looked very different from bankers, as you can see. This is Tom Bloxham, the chairman of a factory. This is John McGrath. He's the creative director. And these were our clients, or the users, actually, on this project. They make beautiful work. They have a festival every 2 years. And all the work, they ask a lot of artists to create work for them. And it's mostly very contemporary, but also a mix of hip hop and opera, etc., etc. They really are looking for new ways of performances. And a very difficult project also. This is us. There's the city, and in between we had the user, and here we had a developer next door. And at a certain point, the city decided that the developer, because he was very successful in the city, became our project manager. And this ended up in a total nightmare thing because he had no idea about theaters. And designing theaters is really not designing offices or housing, what he was used to. So at a certain point, this was changed and it got to this. So we had a direct contact with Manchester, but and the user was next to it, which is also the most important person to talk to when you design a building. And the city decided any talk you have that will only cost money, so we're gonna strip that out. So we had secret talks for the rest of the project, actually. And of course, the money got a bit out of hand. We started with 80 million pounds, became 120, and at the end we ended at 240 million pounds. It was clear the first meeting we had after the competition was about money. So I think on this project, we mostly talked about money all the time. I show you quickly the entry. So this was our idea. We really wanted, so now we go back into another type of view. We really wanted let's say, to create a space that fits this organization. They were used to do performances in front spaces. So this kind of industrial, kind of rough environment, that was something the look we were looking for at that time. But this kind of also all the machinery that you need in order to do performance, that has an industrial beauty that we thought fit also to the city. And it was our sketch on the building, a kind of box, multifunctional box, almost like a warehouse where you on the scene you can build whatever, and actually you could do whatever you want in that space. This was our competition entry. The building at the end looks very different. I will tell you later on. And this is actually, it's a very simple concept. It's a flexible space. It's a space of 80 by 40 meters by 20 meters high and a fixed auditorium. These are the two components, and they actually make the building. For the flexible box, these were the collages we made for the competition. Of course, you can imagine there we can do so many things. So this idea was that you would have 3D performance all around the walls, but then the performance would not move, but the public would just move and go from one performance to another. Or a big making space where you could actually make a huge art piece all together as a kind of performance experience within the city. 3D cinema or an art fair. And of course, this was all about flexibility. So we had to make many diagrams on what you could also do. Of course, the main obvious one is in the main hall, you do a big gig for 5,000 people and you use the theater separately. Of course, there's lots of in between. So here is a kind of, let's say here the whole building is used, here also, and here it's separate, and here the auditorium, for example, takes over the warehouse. And then, of course, you can imagine you have 100 bridges in between. But with this idea, we won the competition because this was the warehouse and this was the theater. And we said, with this composition of the two volumes, you can do an opera XL. And this is how it looks. So the stage could be in the theater, but by opening doors here, the stage could also be here. And that meant you could make a stage that is about 50 meters deep. And our big example was this, that you have a performance of 50 meters deep, as you can see here, where you have real perspective. And at the end of the stage, we made a big door. So you can imagine, after the performance is finished, the actors opening the door and they walk away into the theater. And this was also an inspiration for us, for the outside, really quite rough and quite industrial. And here you see how it then turned out. This is the big multifunctional space, and these are the back of house spaces with offices, etc. So this is not there, but this whole area is under construction. So when we opened, we had to Photoshop away all the signs of the construction property here next to it. But this is normally open. But here you can see the towers with the back of house functions, the central box which is lifted off the ground, and a string that we have to keep open that basically continues on the building. And here you see there was also a historical warehouse next to it. So how these different industrial layers started. This is the ground floor lobby, very industrial. There was also no money, to be very honest. So we had to ceilings. There was no money for ceilings. So we had to do it quite simple. But also here, trying to get this atmosphere back of. In the main hall, we have big partition walls. They were like 20 meters tall. They are the biggest ever made. To separate the space so that you can do two performances in the same space. So here you see how the walls look. So it's a lot of absorption. We have a technical grid, so you can hang cars, buildings from this grid, where you could actually do whatever you want in this space. And this is a bit, when they start building up the space here, you can see how this grid, technical grid on top, enables you to do whatever you want to do. And here, so this is a view from the main hall back to the auditorium. This is all beautiful connected. So this was one of the first performances in the hall, as you can see. So as you can see, in a building like this, you do not design a room, but your room is just the backdrop. Because at the end of the day, the room will be designed by the person who creates this performance in the space. This was a big exhibition in the same space. It also shows you a little bit from how multifunctional this space was. And this was the theater. This was an image competition, a balcony, and seat, and how the theater eventually looked with the balcony. The stalls here, the seats could be flat, so you have pop concerts here. And this is how it looks when you have a performance on stage. And who decided what is beauty? This was the most honorable project I ever did in my life. Money was always a problem. So, and we had Brexit, and we had the war in Ukraine. So you can imagine it was a nightmare. And Brexit was the worst because in the UK, since Thatcher, they don't produce anything; they import everything. So at a certain point, we were in the middle of construction, and they couldn't get that what we needed to have in the building. So we got the contractor came and said, "Yeah, you know, we need this budget, and yeah." So I have three British contractors, and they have these three projects, and this is the most we can do. You can choose. You can decide the color, but not always the color, because they have also restricted colors, so you have to deal with it. So we never actually knew. This was because every item that had to be built in this building was a cost discussion at any time and could change at any time. We actually were not able to control, we did not know, we could not control the outcome. So it was constantly having 6 balls in the air, and that, you know, a blue wall could become red, a door could become, I don't know, concrete instead of black, what you wanted. So it was extremely, extremely difficult. I must say I'm happy at the end with what it became, but it was really difficult. And beauty actually was not part of the discussion with the client. It was just me. And the beauty, you could only think about yourself, you know, like, okay, how am I going to fix this? And there were many moments in this process that I thought, this project, I don't know, I never experienced something like that in my life. So this is what I have to say about beauty. I heard there was supposed to be a Q&A. Any questions? Or are you doing that?
Vielleicht einmal kurz.
Ah.
Der ist leider noch in der Berufungskommission, deswegen kann der die Diskussion nicht leiten, aber ich habe Fragen von eurer Seite.
Es kann auch auf Deutsch, weil
Maybe just for the last designing or creating beauty with scarcity. Is that kind of a new task for the younger generation? Was that maybe an interesting project for you to have this restriction material?
now the thing that there are restrictions, I think, is also brings you to new ideas, you know. So, and I know that the new generation will be more restricted than before. For example, in Casa da Música. Casa da Música was a kind of paradise. You know, in Portugal you could have anything made by hand, actually, and it was beautiful. I think so, but I must say, I hope for all of you in this room that you don't get to experience what I had experienced with Factory International. I'm happy at the end, but I'm just saying the architectural process is not designed like this. In order to control the process, control quality, and also control cost, it's actually quite good that you know at a certain point what you're going to do. Just execute it. But when everything is constantly a question mark, you know, when you and the client tells you every day. But you will face it, I'm sure. But yeah, as I said, managing this process, or let's say influencing the client and the talking that you have to do to keep them on track is maybe the hardest stuff. But it also depends. I mean, we also worked with architects. For example, we worked with an architect in London in the beginning on allies on the workshop because we didn't really dare to start executing projects in UK, which we never did before. So we had nothing to go there. But they are, I think, with clients. You know, when a client says, I don't like this, I want that, then they say, okay, fine. I think I also had the trouble that I was not very good in compromises. So at a certain point, you have a kind of an idea and you want to execute it. And with Worcester, they wanted to just knock it off. Like, we don't need this whole bullshit. And I thought I did fight very, very long time because I believed it was a good thing to have, and they're now very happy with it. But your imagination is much larger than and that makes the discussion sometimes really difficult. I think the Russians was extreme because they had really no 3D feeling whatsoever. Seriously, most clients, they look at an image, but they don't really grasp what they're getting or what you're doing. It's very difficult. It's so trained for us, it's so normal to think, and it's so not normal. Any more?
Another question about working in the office in OMA.
Yeah.
I mean, one of
I was one of 8.
Describe your work within this partnership. Like, you talked a lot about how you dealt. How did you deal inside?
Yeah, I think I must say, I started, the strength of the office is I think that there is no one master. So the strength of the office is really the diagram I used in the beginning, is that you work as a group of creative people. And with that group, you make something. And at a certain point, your task for me was also become more scripted than designing everything. So but that process can be quite hard. But I can also tell you that every disagreement you have or every fight, we had fights internally, seriously, because people were so extremely fanatic and driven in our office that we had fights, discussions, etc., etc. But all fights and discussions also made you rethink what you were thinking about. Is that really the best? Can it not be better? And sometimes when somebody said something seriously nasty to you, it became the inspiration of making it better. So in that sense, a very critical environment is, I think, very good for architecture. And so that was the environment. And yeah, and also we were also not the kind of group that always we all had the same taste. We had also different tastes. And I was also the only woman. I think I met more decisions on pure emotional basis. I mean, the materials, a lot of things buildings are pure emotional decisions. There's no about it. And I think that is something that I added to it first. Because I'm a woman, I don't know. But anyway, and I think that gave I don't want to make myself too many compliments because I leave the the conclusion to you, but I think it gave a kind of poetic layer to the project, made them less harsh and unpredictable. And irony, which is also in these projects, jokes about things. I think that made these projects richer.
Maybe another question, adding to that, it's also interesting for the students to know how many architects at your office on one of these projects?
God.
How big?
Now, Casa da Música, 10. It's a long time ago, 10 people, I think. And on the Rothschild Bank, we started with a team of 6, 7, male and female. And I found out that male didn't work. So there was just too much test room on the table between our male architects and the Rothschilds. So at a certain point, I changed the whole team to female. It worked fantastically because there were hardly any women working at Rothschild. So we were very happy when I saw a woman. 6, 7, yeah, it's about that. But for example, when we started CCTV, which is the youth project which I didn't show today, we were at 50. So it's big teams. Yeah, but I like that. The more, the better.
How many are there in total?
Around 250. But of course, there's an office in New York, Rotterdam, and Hong Kong. And New York is actually quite large at the moment. We will see. That is quite large. Yeah, 250 people. Yeah, at a certain point, we were 450. And that was not good because I didn't know anymore if people were working in the office for a visitor or not. So that was not a good thing. But it's also nice. It's nice to have a large organization because it also gives you the ability to do big projects. You cannot do a big project in a small office because when the project stops, your office dies. So, and in order to, and also when you have a larger office, every architect is different also in the office. People are better in that, and some people are better at that, and some people like more that and that. So you suddenly get a kind of much more freedom in choosing the perfect composition of your team for a certain project. So but I always liked larger offices, complex projects.
Maybe one question to the topic beauty. As you describe maybe your own from beauty, it sounds very personal, or it's a little element, kind of or poetic. Do you think there are also some kind of general in architecture which influence beauty, like dimensions or true kind of roots?
Yeah, the problem with beauty is that historical beauty, most people like historical buildings. Most people actually don't like any of the buildings. But I think what is nice about architecture that it plays a trick on these kind of universal beauty ideas. And making something ugly can also become very beautiful because you make something in the context of something else. So it depends on where you are. For example, it's such a rough city. You can't put the Casa da Música there. It's just so beauty for me was always two-sided. One side is what is intriguing, You know, what is so intriguing that it makes people wonder. You see people wonder, what is this? I think that is a certain level of beauty. I think that is probably the biggest drive for modern architects. You know, what is intriguing? What can I test? And the other one is just pure feeling. You know, is it? You know, when you finish a building, a journalist asks you why is it red? Well, because I liked it. You know, that is also so. It's a mix, and beauty can also grow on you. You know, sometimes you start a project, but by working on it and on it, about new twists or irony or anything, at a certain point, the beauty. And sometimes it becomes really ugly, but then it's beautiful again. You know, for example, I can't show you everything about this project. This building, the steel structure of this building is so insane because the client wanted to really hang and put, you know, trucks in the room, hang trucks from the ceiling, etc. So at a certain point, we got a steel contract, and the client decided, in order to save money, that the structure engineer would not do the details, the contractor would do the details. So we had no design control. So we have, like, you know, steel columns like that with plates on it this thick, with like bolts on it this thick, and like 60 in a row. That is actually not that beautiful at all, but it became beautiful at a certain point. That's what I mean. It's just, and I think especially in architect, because as an architect, you never stop thinking. You keep developing. So there's never a real definition what beauty is, because it changes, I think. Yeah.
Maybe one question. A project that always was very fascinating in Casa da Música, and really the question, how much flick correction? How many steps did it take from the flick correction idea?
Oh, the Y2K. Well, not much.
Because there was always this.
Yeah. You know, we always a moment story for the press.
Yeah.
But you can imagine when you have an office and you do a lot of competitions or commissions, sometimes you come up with new concepts. You know, there is this kind of wonderful moment where you come up with a new idea. And I think this working together with this guy who wanted this villa didn't work out because at all. So the project was stopped. And I think it was just very simple. You know, we had a large auditorium, a small auditorium. That concept of having a solid with voids in it, what you can program around, is back of house and closed. It made it very well fit. And that happened a lot in the office. It is, but it happened a lot. But it was quite obvious, you know, an auditorium, and then you connect. And yeah, it's a bit Hadith, you know, has quite often the same.
Yeah, but it does fit the city much better than that.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, so you should not do it all the time, but I'm just saying it was a coincidence. This concept worked very well for this project. It worked very well because it was the most difficult concept to build. Seriously. It was actually insane, you could say. You know, but we did it because we really believed in the space, junk space, and of course we had the concept the same. Because in the house it was about clean, because the guy didn't like to see any mess, see his family. That's why the concept was like that. And in Casa da Música, it was about front of house and back of house. So it's very, you know, you can transform many concepts from one to another. And of course, it works out. Yeah. It works better than for a house at the end, I think.
When you look at this, there was this theater outside where they drove.
Yeah, yeah.
damaged in anywhere, or did they restore?
No, they just have the holes. So they just made holes, and then every year. But that's why I'm saying you can also be too precious about your project. And at the end, in the beginning, as I said, you are a bit in shock because you be like, Jesus, all the pain we put in getting this concrete right with mock-ups and God knows what and mixes, and then you just drill a hole. But then at the end, what you get back is so much bigger than the hole. It's better, actually. Yeah.
I have a question about, we thought about beauty, but this was your tactics. So you were
My tactics.
yes, about talking about the costs a lot, and if you are giving design proposals, you know it's going to be done with this budget. Do you just go to the client and say, hey, it's going to be done, or do you just say, oh, we can do it for example, without saying that it's going to be?
I have to enlighten you. So in Portugal, for example, with public projects, it's a very normal recipe. They start with a low budget. They tender something where they know it will never finish, and then somehow they think they will find a way to find the money. That is a bit how it works. That you don't know on day one, of course, because we were very serious in the beginning to find cost savings, not to the level because the money they had was ridiculous low. It was not possible. But as I said, you know, they also didn't want. So at a certain point you be there. But in Manchester, for example, where we had the big, that was even weirder because all the architects submitted for the competition, the client had a cost calculator who calculated the cost of these projects. And he said, well, probably fine, we'll fit the budget. So, you know, and with the Rothschilds, I can't about the Rothschilds because it's confidential, of course.
Yeah.
But yeah, there it was a bit different. But of course, you can imagine, you know, the Rothschilds are not rich because they do a lot of money on projects. They are also cost conscious, of course. But it's not always the case that, as I said, clients tender a program for a competition that quite often doesn't really work. So either the program is too big, the budget is too low, or all kinds of other things. You know, I mean, in Manchester, they had 80 million. And what did these guys do? They said, okay, I want a volume of 40 by 80 meters, plus a theater, and please put it on the existing viaduct, and also make sure that the highway runs underneath it. I mean, ting, you know. But that happens, seriously. And that is also nice, of course, because and there are also projects that are more controlled. Yeah, I also had controlled projects. That's true. I've picked the juicy ones for you guys today, so that I can tell you it's all not that how they teach it. It's the world is not wilder than it looks. Yeah.
You talked a lot about talk a lot of to what you find you would be interested in. What is your strategy to convince them the idea is so nice or they actually will, even if it's hard to convince them?
Yeah. God, I have to analyze myself. Well, first of all, before I answer the thing, working in South of Europe is very different in the north of Europe. In the south of Europe, we talk about beauty, and beauty is a word that is used by clients. In the north of Europe, mostly talk about risks and money, about beauty, except with Baron David de Rothschild because he's French, beauty and etc. etc. But actually, you discuss it a lot less. So for every client, you have to find it. It's a lot of charm. You have to to listen to your, like, or you have to try to understand what he's looking for. If you can get that at all, and then it's hard work. You have to put a lot of energy in showing images, visiting other projects, do a lot of talking to them, try to find a way of explaining the story that they understand. Because sometimes architects also tell stories that clients really do not understand at all. So sometimes you have to use very simple references instead of complicated theoretical references. So it really depends on the client. Now, when I worked with the Rothschild, it's the vocabulary they know. They all owned mansions and palaces. So they know the concept of the Chinese room, the red room, the green room. So I use that in my story. When I say I want to have rooms, then I say, so as in all buildings, when you have rooms. Because I know they know that. So you have to find that connection. And sometimes it also takes on the client to get used to it. So sometimes I always made booklets for, because I know A4 fits in your, and then I know the booklet is taken home. And somebody else. Yeah, these are all tricks. Yeah, that's all. I don't know. Talking is a lot of talking. I try to be very charming. And as I said, you have to find this connection. And it's not easy because I can tell you, we did a project in Qatar for the Central Library. And, we had Shaika, which is a modern lake, was actually between. We had a huge group of experts. And these were, we had interior designers, they came from Australia. And they explained to us how we should with culture, which was total nonsense. They told us stories that were just how all this process went in one direction. We were lucky after 2 years in contact with the China directly. And from that moment on, we were able to do content design and then change everything back again. So understanding the culture, your client is also be too stiff in your own architecture. As I said, the Rothschilds was, of course, took me a long time to get used to, how they think. But at the end, it was completely new. So that was also interesting. So I think that, but still in that whole process, it's quite to be able to live with yourself. You know what I mean? So you have to also be quite flexible and creative yourself. You have to find another. And quite often it makes it better when you do it cleverly.
Maybe one last question. It's a question Andre
wanted to ask. He told you already. Okay.
Living on airport, what are your plans for the future?
Oh, I have no idea yet. No, actually, I'm still in the process of creating distance to what I did. So that's why maybe now I talk differently about this first 2 years ago. And then from there on, I have a bit of a problem with myself sometimes because I'm a total control freak. So when I start a building takes 10 years, and I am a person who wants to control it to the last if I can. So, and that I decided I don't want to do it. So I want to help other people, teach other people, but I don't want to anymore be the person who does the whole thing. It's very, very hard. just tired of fighting. And not fighting, but as you said, how do you convince the client? It takes so much energy, so much energy. And maybe I want to do it again in a year. Then I want to do these long projects, and I did a lot of projects, and I'm very happy. I did what I did. So I think it's more interesting now to look at somebody else's work maybe, and not being inside my own machine all the time. Because I never teach when I work, because I never had time. You know, a few months ago, I went to a film festival. I was sitting in a cinema at 9 o'clock in the morning in a weekday. That was my life, you know. It's not only that it's hard work, but I had also projects abroad. You know, one meeting in Manchester took me 2 days because I had to travel and go there, etc., etc. So it was always to the max. And it's just, I want to go back a little bit where I don't have, I think the stress, the management of the whole process became a big part of what I did. And then when you become a partner in the office, you can imagine your life looks like, okay, I designed still a lot, that was quite good, but everything that people could not solve ended up on my desk. So you had also days where you just had a list of 20 nasty things you had to finish the day. And I'm very happy at the moment that I don't do this. And maybe it's coming back, but it's also because I'm just fanatic and I hate compromising. So I'm a bit my own enemy on that. So, but it's fine. I had a great time being an architect. I think it's a fantastic profession, but it's hard. It's hard because you're not an artist. You are an artist, but you're not an artist. And that makes the profession very complicated. You know, when you're an artist, you can decide completely how the painting is going to look. And then you can sell it to somebody, and that person, and if you like it more, he takes it off the wall. It's a much easier process. But being an architect is much more complicated. You're on one hand, you're an artist. Somebody pays you as a consultant, you service provider. And then when you finish the project, it will sit there for 50 years. So you also have a big responsibility that you did well. And that makes our profession quite heavy. And the project takes between 5 to 10 years. I mean, it's long. It's long. So you have to stay concentrated and dedicated to the end. But to end it well. It's also nice to do, but I was sometimes surprised in our office that we had architects in the office who only liked to work on a project for 6 months. And they were bored. It was a bit like, but you're not, we know the project takes 5 to 10 years. So not everybody can. So the short-term things, that is more what I short things.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, you're welcome.